Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. And remember, as we always say on this show, when we talking about going green, we don't mean mere environmentalism. We're talking about something deeper. Some folks call it deep ecology. Some folks talk about it as an indigenous worldview. Some folks talk about it from an eco-spiritual perspective. Yet others talk about it as the hard science of the planetary limits and our need to work and live within those boundaries. Or maybe you like me and say, all that's true. But folks, what we saying is this: we are living in an interconnected web of life on this big blue marble called Spaceship Earth. And whatever we do to this web, we are ultimately doing to ourselves and the way the current society is working. And I mean capitalism, industrialism, imperialism, the entire world order. We are doing it wrong. And here on Redneck Gone Green, we're committed to educating, agitating, and organizing in order to get back to the balance that we lived. And with that, I'm going to bring my co-host Shane Knight into the conversation. As we always do, Shane Knight, how you feeling, brother?
Well, I'm a little Monday-ish, I guess I'd say. It's been a long week.
And I want to just say, Shane, you're not up to snuff, man. I mean, I understand your wife has been tested for COVID. Like, how you feeling, brother?
Yeah, I feel somewhat like I've been batted across the face with a wiffle ball bat for the last 20 minutes. But other than that, I'm here. I'm excited about our guest today. But, COVID is one thing, but dealing with COVID on top of what the world is throwing into our face is a whole different story. We found out yesterday morning that my wife was diagnosed with or tested positive with COVID, and I'm still testing negative, although I don't feel great. But I was able to have a very fulfilling, productive work week last week, and I had another glimmer of, I guess you would call it, hope, perhaps. The guy was the Democratic state senator that won the upset election in Pennsylvania. It was a small town. I think it was East Petersburg. I may be wrong about that, but I think it's East Petersburg is the name of the township when which he is also the mayor, and he's a computer app designer, and he just won a very big upset election in a very Republican leaning district, which is sending
James Andrew
shockwaves
Malone,
across
who
it.
you talking about?
Yeah, that's him, James Andrew
And,
Malone.
and I got to say, I mean, that was a huge upset because in this horrible winner take all, first past the post election system that we're in, this was not just a Republican leaning district. This was one where Trump had won an overwhelming majority in the last election. And what I would say, my read is that Malone's victory really underscores the fact that people are disgusted by what they're seeing out of the Trump administration.
I think, yeah, that's one way to look at it for sure. That's the way I think the Democrats are going to start spinning it, and other people in the media are starting to spin it. And I think what it was, the Democrats had not represented that particular county in over 100 years, something like that. But I mean, the other people on the other side, the Republicans, are saying, "Oh no, it wasn't that they're rebuking Trump. It was a failure of the Republican go-to, election cycle. The Democrats just got people to send in mail-in ballots." So they're trying to spin it where, no, it wasn't a victory for the Democrats. It was a failure for this tiny, small Republican. That's how they're going to frame it. So they just run over each other all the time. It's disgusting.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing. Like what we know here on Redneck Gone Green is that leadership of both the Democratic and Republican Party has it's just uninspiring is one way to say it. The other way to say it is that they are just not representing the interest of ordinary working class folks of any race, of any gender whatsoever. And of course, that brings me to this. I mean, it's worth pointing out that Bernie Sanders and
Hmm.
Alexandria Cortez are touring the country and riling up people, having huge crowds. But of course, the problem is that they're trying to get people to go back into a Democratic Party, and the leadership of the Democrat Party is not supporting what Bernie and AOC are all about. So it's a hell of
No.
a watch, isn't it?
Yeah, it's disgusting. But at the same time, I'm excited to see what Bernie and AOC are doing. Talk about crowd size, which is really astonishing because the orange Palpatine in charge has been bloviating about it left and right. Oh, I hear Bernie's doing it. Yes, 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 whatever. The fact of the matter is, you're right. They are doing something good, and people are responding to it positively. But at the end of the day, they're not giving people anything to do, like you said, other than to sign up to support a party that is not fighting for them. We've seen them just roll over left and right over the last few weeks, right?
Well, I'll tell you, they have been rolling over, and the word of the day is capitulation.
Yeah.
And that word happens to be the title of this week's Tracking the Crisis. So, for Redneck Gone Green viewers, listeners who have been paying close attention, Shane and I have been making good use of that Tracking the Crisis. And last week we had Joe Guinan of the Democracy Collaborative on as our guest. Well, this week, y'all, we bringing in Mel Figueroa, who's the journalist who is the creator and researcher of Tracking the Crisis. Uh, Mel Figueroa is I got to say, a dear friend of mine. She's a journalist and educator for over 20 years. She started as a community organizer. She's worked at KPFK Pacifica Radio. She taught courses in geography and environmental studies at UC Berkeley and Sonoma State University. And I have to say this, I met her when I was the campaign manager for the Jill Stein Jamu Baraka campaign in 2016, and she served as the national press director. And that led us in 2017 to traveling the country doing movement school for revolutionaries. So I've gotten to know her really well. And since then, she's been working and co facilitating workshops on environmental organizations and state and agencies connecting the dots between traditional ecological knowledge and Western science. So back to my intro. And these days, she's working with the Democracy Collaborative as the editor of Tracking the Crisis. Mel Figueroa, welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
It's great to be here, David. Good to be back in the saddle.
I know, right? And I got to tell you, man, like I have been a little bit in that shock and awe part myself. And the Tracking the Crisis has really been a tool that has helped me because of how you've laid it out. So I want to actually turn the mic over to you completely and just say, for folks who may not be using this tool yet, tell us about what the Tracking the Crisis is.
Okay, so yeah, Tracking the Crisis is basically a weekly news roundup. Our catchphrase is literally, "We read the news so you don't have to." And that's basically what it is. I know that, ever since the Trump's inauguration, and the administration has been going at breakneck pace, and that's been on purpose. I think Joe talked about it last week, where, overwhelming the news cycle, like, paralyzing people into despair with the rapidity and speed and aggression of attacks on democracy is kind of the point. And when I took the job, it was an interesting time for me because, again, you and I did a lot of work during the first Trump administration, and so we went real deep on a lot of things that other people weren't picking up on during the first administration, like creeping fascism, like some of these folks, Peter Thiel, all of these, like, Silicon Valley billionaires that were already starting to fund far right movements. And so in one sense, it didn't affect me as much to kind of like get me into shock and awe, because in some ways I was already kind of like anticipating that was already going to happen. I mean, not necessarily predicting what went down, which has been a lot, and maybe more than any of us anticipated. But there was a sense of like, okay, you know what, he's going to do stuff, right? And it's going to be really important to have that kind of bird's eye view, not just of what he is doing, but how people are responding to it. So, like tracking the crisis is actually something I would have been doing anyway. um, if I wasn't working with an organization to do it, which is, to kind of like be able to take the news cycle and put it and like say, okay, what is the story that is emerging out of the many different kinds of stories that are coming out? And so that's kind of how the approach that I've taken to kind of curating this news roundup every week is, a
So
lot
I
of
want to
times.
stop you, Mel,
Yeah.
for just one moment, because when you talk about curating, that to me has been one of the really helpful things that you've done. Because, like, I'm paying attention to the news as well, right? And it's coming fast and furious, right? And again, just as Steve Bannon warned us, the muzzle velocity, right? So that's been true. But what I've really deeply appreciated that you're doing with the Democracy Collaborative is grouping it in ways that is making sense to actually see the pattern of the assault.
Hmm. And that's kind of the point, is like, looking at pattern recognition, is because you can't really get the whole picture from one or two big headlines, and a lot of times what mainstream media will do will like, they'll highlight one or two big stories and just kind of do all kinds of stuff on that. Meanwhile, trans people are being targeted over here, immigrants are being targeted over here. Like, what's really going on underneath? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do every week, which is, accumulate a bunch of links, but then go through each of them, and then you can kind of see the patterns that kind of come out and the stories that are emerging. Like, so for instance, right, the stories this week about capitulation, right? All eyes are on Columbia University right now, but there are 60 other universities under investigation, and then there were, two, now three other students that have been detained at universities not at Columbia, right? And so what happens when you put all of those different stories together? You kind of see something that's emerging, a pattern, a trend, a maybe sometimes underlying motives that kind of come out under that. I really appreciate one of our test readers in the first few weeks who suggested that I include a weekly item called Tracking the Money. And so Tracking the Money basically looks at, where are the benefits to all of these Doge cuts? Where are all of these going? And those are stories that many times kind of fly under the radar of kind of the more outrageous and the theatrics of what's going on. Trump has dropped over 100 lawsuits for corporations that have been violating the law and screwing over customers and screwing over the American people. There's been a lot of deregulation. There's a lot of privatization. Some of the items I've put together are like, connecting the dots between the firings of National Park Service and Forest Service employees and these and the privatization of public lands that's kind of on the table right now. So those are the things of like kind of keep our eye on the prize. There's a lot of theatrics going on, as we know, from Trump, but if we just concentrate on that, we won't really see the real harm that's being done to our society and to democracy. And so kind of keeping our eye on keeping a bird's eye view, but also keeping an eye on what's important for the American people and not just for the theatrics of the news cycle.
So let's go right into this week's Tracking the Crisis, because it's, I think, again, I love how you've laid it out, and it is chock full of, again, you're aggregating. I love the tagline, by the way, reading the news so you don't have to, because really I have definitely appreciated being able to say, I've got this aggregator that is laid out in a way that makes sense to me so I can kind of keep up. So I'm going to turn to you, Mel, and say, all right, this week's Tracking the Crisis, you kick it off with basically journalists just getting and activists getting snatched up by the Trump administration. So I'm going to invite you, Mel Figueroa, walk us through this week's Tracking the Crisis.
Well, so yeah, the on the website, we have kind of like one word summaries of like what's the general vibe of the week. And the general vibe of the week of this week, or this past week, just happens to be capitulation. Columbia University, and there's actually two kind of major stories that came out this week. One was Columbia University conceding to a list of Trump demands that are really unprecedented and really dangerous for academic freedom. One was like demanding that the school change its admissions rules, change its disciplinary rules, and also put an entire department, the Department of Middle Eastern and African Studies, under academic receivership, which means like it's basically like uh, uh yeah, like putting it under surveillance, which is like really really harmful for academic freedom. And not only that, Columbia not only conceded to the Trump's demands, which the freezing of $400 million in federal funding was already legally suspect. They could have fought it in court. They could have, I mean, even though yes, Trump is flouting the courts, that's the avenue to fight it. But instead of fighting it, Columbia just rolled over, and not only rolled over, they also did, like, they went above and beyond even what the Trump administration was asking of them. They revoked the degrees of 22 students that had been involved in pro-Palestine protests. They removed their admissions guidance for undocumented students, kind of basically making it the university inaccessible for immigrant students. So seeing the way that again, this university that $400 million is a lot, but other like even the Columbia University students that were being hunted by ICE have been able to successfully challenge the Trump administration legally, and the university just didn't do that. Now today we are seeing that the Trump administration is targeting Harvard University for more than $1 billion in federal funding. And I mean, like, Harvard University isn't even as liberal as Columbia. So, we'll see how that goes. The other thing that was going on was that major law firms.
So before we go to the law firms,
Yeah,
because again, they're chunk after chunk.
there's a
But,
lot. There's a
There's
lot.
a lot, and we've got a comment from that I want to lift up, and this is a question directly to you, and it goes like this. Mel, you've been great at creating informative maps. I wonder if tracking the crisis could include a visual mapping component, which would be neat.
It really could be. And, maybe if there's more time, I mean, a lot of my week is spent kind of reading a lot of news. But yeah, that would be something I would like to be able to do stuff, in terms of that. In lieu of me not having the time to create these things, I do link to a lot of, because other like news outlets and movement organizations actually have been doing some really cool maps and infographics too. So if like at the bottom of each item, generally, if there is a tracker or a like a visual guide, I will generally include that at the bottom of the item in question.
So, again, before we jump back into the content, you've kind of lit up the comment section with some things that we think are really worth talking about. I want to lift up Michael Nugent, who is a frequent viewer, listener, who Mel,
Yes.
from back in the day, as the kids say. Michael has said, tracking the crisis so far has had a very domestic bent, which is understandable. But how do international things like German rearmament or war in Sudan factor into the crisis? Is the crisis just here, or is it global as well?
Oh no, it's absolutely global. And I mean, this week and maybe the last couple of weeks, the top stories have been domestic. But if you go back in some of the previous weeks, another thing I am tracking, because I do teach globalization, and I've been interested in and had studied political economy for many years. A lot of things that I am tracking is like the global trade war, German rearmament, actually European rearmament, which started a few weeks ago, um, after it kind of became clear that Trump would not toe the line on Ukraine versus Russia. So yes, again, I can't. There's a lot to capture every week, and so I might not include everything every week, especially if, like, sometimes I'll get a bunch of information on some kind of developing story, like the trade war, like kind of the shifts in global relations, but the story is not quite clear or emerging yet at the time that I write the tracker, which is generally on Thursdays. So sometimes I'll leave it till the other week to kind of see how the story plays out. And then, there might be kind of like, oh, okay, it's hit some kind of point where the movement of the story is a little more coherent, and then I can be able to, like, kind of trace what's going on. So that happens a lot. Like I said, just subscribe to the list so that you can follow it week by week. Again, if I don't include a particular story, it's not because that story is not important. It could also be that I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens before being able to put it in a coherent nutshell for people to understand what's going on.
And that again has been one of the things that I found the most helpful, which does bring us back to, there was in fact a trend or a storyline around the law firms, and I want to let
Oh,
you
yeah.
sort of lay out what you observed there.
Well, again, this is real interesting. And it kind of really shows, I think, not just kind of people's, like, cowardice or fear, although it is, but I think it also stems from and this is also something I'm observing from tracking kind of the global economy and the moves in the global economy as well. I mean, we've had, what, 40 some odd years of neoliberalism now, and the idea that neoliberalism has been in crisis for a very long time, and that people's economic situation is far more shaky than I think even the mainstream media and economic media will let on. Um, like these law firms that are, just like, I don't know, they're accepting these really strange things, this Paul Weiss law firm that accepted that they would do $40 million in pro bono legal work for Trump and right-wing causes. So it's like just Trump and friends, right? It's kind of like a blank
I mean,
check.
it's extortion is what it
It
is,
is.
right?
It's
It's
absolutely
literally,
extortion.
it's mafioso style approach, and to do it
Absolutely.
under the auspices of pro bono work, which as a practicing trial lawyer, like we took that very seriously. That's when we say, what does pro bono mean in Latin?
Mhm. Yep.
For the public good. Like,
Yep.
this is insane.
Yep. No, it's like they're turning everybody into Better Call Saul, Um, but and then some law firms have fought it in court, and then others, like this new Skadden Arps, there's I reported on one lawyer that resigned after that law firm is now accepting $100 million. So I mean, what we have here, I think, is that very, like you said, it's gangster, it's patronage, right? It's people who are falling all over themselves to curry favor with the strong man in charge, because they're scared of what happens if they fight, because they have a lot to lose that they perceive. Even Colombia, after Colombia did all of that stuff and rolled over for the administration, they were like, that's a great first step. And
At
then
the
they
end of
moved
the
the
day,
goalpost. They're like, we're not going to give you the money just yet. Oh, we're going to keep stringing you along. And
yeah.
you know, I mean, like,
Look who we're talking about
I
here. He
I play
didn't pay
narcissistic abuse
contractor.
bingo all the time. I know how this works. You know?
That's hilarious. I mean, I don't understand why people are looking at it thinking that he's going to do anything different than he's ever done. We are looking at
That's
a
right.
fucking asshole who wouldn't pay contractors the fee that they deserved for the labor that they'd done for that fucker. So I'm sitting here like, okay, why do these universities and law firms, especially the law firms, just sit there and say okay and then fuck off and do whatever they want anyway? Because that's the game he wants to play.
That's the game.
What you know, where at some point somebody's literally going to have to stand up and do something about it. And I'm
That's right.
supremely disappointed that nobody has yet called him on his bluff or just had the gumption to stand up and say, no, you little bastard.
Well, you
Leave it
know
at
what?
that.
I know one thing, we are not going to be able to count on the people that have things to lose, right? I don't know if y'all have been watching White Lotus, but I've been watching White Lotus about the story. I mean, I'm not gonna spoil it for anybody, but you know, the idea that you have these rich people who are, you know, they're trying to hold on to the life to which they have been accustomed,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to risk everything, to be able to risk possibly losing money or reputation or whatever it is they got their fingers in. You know, you're not able to manipulate someone until you're able to get them on something, right?
And you know, Mel,
And
I
that's
want
what's
to.
happened with these universities. Under neoliberalism, these universities have gotten more and more and more dependent on this oligarchic class. And so they're not going to roll over. It's going to be up to us, who have nothing to lose, honestly, except our rights and our freedoms and the things that we're willing to fight for. You know, veterans, federal workers, people who are already in the ringer. It's going to be up to us, you know, and we can't. We have to understand, like, what, again, not just the balance of forces, but the stakes of the battle. You know, the administrators of Columbia University are not, they're not invested in academic freedom. They're invested in capital projects.
So
And
I'll
that's
say
the
Exactly.
this: in the tracker, you also track the movement response, and
yes.
I want to lift up that part of it. Even as I go to another comment in the chat, which seems perfectly timed, and that is asking us, and I'll pass it along to our viewers and listeners. What will you do if he declares a true dictatorship, seeing his third term and maybe more intentions? And I think that's an existential question that Atul is asking us. And I'm going to take this moment of opportunity to say, for me, y'all, I've had enough. Like, I don't need any more indication that this is fascism. And I don't care what the Democratic Party talking points are about, oh no, call it oligarchy. Don't scare people with fascism. This is fascism, Mel. Like, we've got to actually come to terms with the fact that we have crossed the Rubicon. And yes, as a lawyer, we should file lawsuits and fight them there. And yes, we should engage media to educate. And if it does not include resistance, disruption, that this will continue and will be consolidated. So I'm going on record right now to say I'm going out on the streets, and I hope others will, on April 5 and other opportunities. It is time for us to lean into the power that we have. Students are doing it. Federal workers are doing it. And at the end of the day, we're all going to have to do it. That's how I see it now.
That's right. And at this point, I'm going to take off my journalist hat, put on my revolutionary hat over here, and say, look, you know, I know that we both joke about, like, embodying that meme of, you know, James Franco with a noose around his neck. First time, you know, my parents, I'm Filipino. My parents left the Philippines after Marcos declared martial law. Like, there are many people who have had, you know, experience. There are people in living memory that have experience with dictatorships far worse than at least what we're getting now, right? But like, all this to say is that, you know, I grew up watching the EDSA revolution on TV, having, with my mom, following it very, very closely, talking about it with my relatives. And, I mean, I had family on both sides of that conflict, and that repressive regime. And, like, that's what keeps me going, honestly, and keeps me from kind of, slipping into paralysis and fear. The fear that makes people roll over is like, look, I wouldn't exist if people did not rise up and resist dictatorship, right? I'm here because, I mean, shoot, my parents not only saw the Marcos dictatorship, they saw the occupation of the Philippines by the Japanese during World War II under military occupation. They lived in the jungle for 2 years, to evade and survive under Japanese occupation. And I know there's many, many people, especially my immigrants in this country, that have experienced the same. And that's where, again, we can't look to the comfortable to tell us what to do, because precisely because they're comfortable. They have been so comfortable that, if anything starts to rock their world, they go into like a fear response. I take my inspiration from all of the movements that have endured and succeeded under incredible repression. And those are the people and the movements that we can take a lot of inspiration from. There are and now in the movement tracker, you'll see not just about April 5th, not just about grassroots protests. One of the interesting things is about the sort of trend that I did link to this on this week's tracker, is that there are researchers that are looking at movement activity now. And even though there aren't big giant demonstrations happening in Washington, no big not a lot of big marches on Washington, there are more protests in more places than
Mhm.
had ever been during the first Trump administration.
So I want
So
to stop
even
there
though the
because this
protests
is
are small, like
this
Grand Rapids, Michigan, Wyoming, all of these places are like people are coming out, and that is something to watch, and that is something to be hopeful for.
This is super important, Mal, because I think that you and I were in the streets in the global justice movement of the '90s. We got tear gassed, we like et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that I think that I picked up from the Tracking the Crisis is not only are there protests and demonstrations happening across the country, which shows a huge level of discontent. What you're tracking is the fact that Trump's original supporters from back in 2016 and even some who voted for him this time seem to be having a genuine, deep sense of voters' remorse. Like Sonic 7 said, as someone who is 100% Trump supporter, I can no longer support that thing. Like this is not something that we have like this seems new. What I'm seeing is people are like, yeah, I know the Democratic Party. I can't trust them, but Trump lied too. Like there's something interesting going on, Mel, and that is an organic from the bottom up democracy front. Like it doesn't
Right.
seem to be being led by the big nonprofits. It doesn't seem to be led and by organized labor. And I'm a big organized labor fan. Something peculiar seems to be going on. Ordinary people are discovering their own power. Am I misreading this? Because it kind of like, I hope I'm right.
I mean, it's just called people know what's happening to them when things happen to them. Like people really aren't that stupid, and that's I've back I've I don't like when people, just kind of, I mean, this is the thing about tracking the crisis too. We have to look at people as people. We can't lump them all into a monolith. Oh, all these Trump supporters are dumb, or all of these Democrats are all, whatever. I mean, people are people, and that's the essence of, what I've known historically as as the attempt at the united front, right, which happened during the 20s and 30s. What was happening is that you had all of these, like people going into these partisan kind of bulwarks and shells and stuff like that. But what a lot of the leading revolutionaries at the time noticed is that, like, that wasn't happening on the street corners, right? On in the streets where disabled and Jewish people and stuff are being, like, like, we're being beat up by black shirts. It was like whoever was around that gave a crap, right, like went and helped, right? I mean, it's like people know when they're being screwed, and people know when people in their community are hurting. And that's what kind of like shows what kind of person you are. Look, to be like, I remember when we were in the Steinbarack campaign 2016, one of the things that a lot of people don't really know is that we actually hit a kind of a ceiling with kind of recruiting liberals around. Actually, a lot of folks that was having personal contact with, that were coming back, were people who had supported Trump, not because they really liked Trump, but because they didn't like the Democrats, And then when they heard what we had to say, they were like, oh yeah, one of the ways that Trump, as a master manipulator, gets people is that, look, as any abuser will capitalize upon that kernel of truth. That's the only way that he can get people to, like, really listen and fear him, right? And so he has done things like articulated problems to ordinary people, but then he'll blame it on DEI or immigrants or something else, rather than his own buddies who are actually working both the Republicans and Democrats to get money.
I
And
gotta say,
that's where Bernie and AOC are getting all of these crowds, because they are articulating the problem that everybody is mad at. I mean, look, this Trump administration didn't come out of nowhere. This crisis, the crisis in the universities, the crisis in the economy, is all happening because neoliberalism has been advanced by both parties to the extent that it's no longer tenable, and it doesn't serve people in everyday life. And everybody knows that. They just don't know what to do about it.
so Mel, I love what you just laid out, and I want to underscore something, y'all. Neoliberalism needs to be understood. You can really understand it very simply. It just means like market uber alles. It basically means let's deregulate everything, and let's embrace, what Margaret Thatcher famously said: there is no alternative. You just have to accept the ongoing perpetuation of capitalism at a global level. And in fact, there is no alternative became so famous that it became known as TINA, Tina. There is no alternative. To which I like to say, ta-ta. There are thousands of alternatives. Human beings have been doing commerce and growing food and taking care of ourselves for hundreds of thousands of years. Capitalism is only a couple of 100 years old. And in that couple of 100 years, with industrialism and capitalism and enclosure, we've been able to start an extinction event. This is nuts, Mel. And so one of the things that I want to really underscore is what you taught me about understanding about Gramscian common sense, the underlying assumptions, because I think this is exposing to me, oh, wait, there are some underlying assumptions that are fundamentally false. And if we examine them and really ask, well, what is it that we really want and need? Because like my Trump voting cousins, what they want is, I want a good life for my family. My children, I want them to have an opportunity that I had. And like, they're not hood wearing Klansmen, right? They're not, and they're not like, bigots and racists. What they are is very concerned and fearful. And I got to say, Trump has stoked that, played to it, but run a game on him. He's a grifter.
That's right. Again, like we know that he's kind of capable of saying anything, but this is kind of one of the ways of cutting through the news, is that Every time he says something that everybody thinks is like, oh, it's so cuckoo insane, there's something going on, and there's somebody getting money under that, right? It's like, what is he doing to distract us from the fact that there's all these handouts or deregulation or something going on? I think the other base assumption that we do need to challenge here is also some of the moderate Democrats and the corporate Democrats' logic, right? Which is, again, if they're trying to figure out what to do, they can't see between 2 points, right? And so there's like, Democrat is over here on the left, weirdly enough, because if you look at the rest of the world, it's like over here, right? And then you have this increasingly, like, this Overton window, right, of the right, that just keeps pulling it like this. But as long as your worldview stays between these 2 points, your logic gets really, really skewed, right? I mean, like, the world is not binary, the world is not black and white, and the world isn't between 2 points of two established parties. If you listen to the people, what the people are saying, if you look at polls, like, the majority of the Americans support Social Security, healthcare, affordable housing, and look, I mean, there's a lot of people that don't, believe in, that's kind of support a line of like, we need to kick out illegal immigrants until they're in a disaster. And I've been in the South after disasters where people have really welcomed the immigrants that have come in and helped to revive places that have been devastated by natural disasters. FEMA is about to go away. You think, I mean, we've had $150 billion disasters just in the last year and a half. Like, and I live in a Trump country that has been devastated by federal disasters. This is not something that's going to work very well, let's just say. A lot of people are going to get disillusioned because what's actually happening is not what they expect.
I'm worried that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
I do want to. You've got a subsection that really we've talked about, but I want to lift it up, and that is that Democratic Party leaders are fearing the quote Tea Party style revolt from progressives. This is back to what you were talking about. Like, what we're seeing is Gramscian common sense. People at the bottom up, like, they know what time it is. Like, this is something I think that, like, I'll just say it, Mel, like, I have never been both more hopeful, but also less exactly sure on how to relate to this motion, because what we're seeing is something that does not fit within the kind of categories that we're accustomed to, right, or used to, right? Like, right. And I think that what we've got to do is not be dogmatic or sectarian. Yes, we have to be principled. Absolutely, our convictions have to be clear, but let's let the real world guide us as we embrace this.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing very, very interestingly is, when they say Tea Party style revolt, I say bring it on. Bring it on in all kinds of ways. And, I think it's really interesting because, look, this country is, again, we have to kind of not look at everything as a monolith. And it's, and I know it's real hard to kind of like just be really observant and try to kind of grasp the complexity of things. These aren't like pieces on a chessboard. These are real people, real communities, and real local contexts. I mean, in some places, like we're seeing in Florida's special election coming tomorrow, there are two Democrats that might be flipping the Republican seats and eroding their very, very slim 3-vote majority in the House. Like, that could mean a lot of things, and am I gonna like knock somebody who's running as a Democrat against a Republican and flipping that seat because it's going to be crucial for, like, say, the budget talks? Like, no, but I'm going to watch what happens. There's other places where, like, new young progressives are challenging the sort of old guard, That's cool. That's interesting too to look at. And again, a lot of it is very specific on the local context of the district, what the balance of forces are in any given place. There are other people. I mean, Bernie Sanders actually like was in the New York Times encouraging people to run as independents if they're not getting support from the party. There are a lot of people who are, socialists, greens, all kinds of, I mean, look, the world isn't black binary. There are so many different alternatives, like you said. Socialist alternative. There's a lot of people that are trying to do stuff in their own communities. Right now is a conjuncture, which means we cannot take the the categories we are used to as like static anymore. Everything is in flux right now. And when we do that, you have to kind of look at it using your own political and moral compass as a guide, right? To kind of, I mean, I think a lot of people kind of cling to party labels sometimes because maybe they're not so sure within their own stuff. But I think if you really know what you believe and what you want to see, then you can kind of look at what people are doing and tap into that. Look, if you don't want somebody to get co-opted by the Democratic Party, get in there and make your own alternative. Nobody's going to respond to just criticism anymore. You've got to be the people with the plan, right?
So, Mel, I want to also, because you've talked, we both talked and mentioned Gramsci a couple of times here. So, this whole notion of the balance of forces, the truly dynamic interplay between social, political, and electoral forces, and that in moments of conjuncture, and in the context of both hegemony and class struggle, that openings emerge that were never possible before.
Right.
And I am assessing, holy smokes, y'all, like there is more opportunity now. In fact, if I was a capitalist as a revolutionary, I'd say business is booming. I've actually got more opportunities than I could possibly exploit. There's more folks that are actually looking for alternatives. And I want to underscore, y'all, yes, elections, 100% elections have consequences. Mel and I met on a radical electoral campaign. I believe in elections and we should engage in them, but don't become an electoral fetishist. Like elections happen once every 2 or 4 years, y'all. Like the real world and real social change is happening right now. Are you engaging in mutual aid and not just in a disaster? But think about the number of times that there are people that you already know and care about, whether you're related to them or they're just in a family group, that you like, let them hold 20, or you take them to a ride somewhere because they need it. I want you to imagine that kind of cooperation and collaboration that we all do all the time. What if we just intentionally leaned into that a little bit, y'all? And what if we said, well, let's just do it a little bit more? Let's engender just a little bit more trust. Let's just open up just a little bit wider the net or the scope of for whom we're willing to give help and ask for help. Because I'll tell you, nothing scares the ruling predatory class more than the solidarity in practice, not just words, but when ordinary people help each other out.
That's right. And I do want to highlight, two things that I've been looking at through the movement tracker that have given me so much hope, actually, a lot of hope and a lot of because when we talk about Gramsci, right, and we talk about being able to cultivate a good sense, right? So he talks a lot about common sense, which can be constructed by anybody, like trans people are weird or immigrants are bad, like those are common senses that can be constructed by anybody. But going into good sense, meaning, what is actually informed by reason and with a good goal in mind, he saw this within the struggle of ordinary people in communities. right? He had been caught up in this intra-party conflict, and then when he realized that wasn't going to work, when he saw the people in his own party getting killed by Mussolini's forces, he looked to what is ordinary people doing on the street. And that's what gives me hope right now. Again, there are struggles going on in every community in this nation right now. Again, the things that give me hope are the people who are organizing on the streets to help immigrants, to block ICE, to record the immigrants getting snatched up. They're not drawing their curtains and looking away like the Germans did. They're organizing, know your rights trainings. Junior high school students are like watching they're watching the internet for like ICE raids and helping their fellow students. Those are the kinds of things that are going to really, like get things going. People who are mobilizing in defense of trans people right now, ordinary communities that are going to their Tesla dealerships and supercharge stations and talking amongst each other, right? It's like, who cares what party they're from or whatever. People who are helping federal workers get jobs in their own communities, that's a pool of talent that we would want to have if we want to construct municipalities and liberated zones that can actually work for people and model what a new society could look like, even as we're resisting what's going down from Washington, D.C.
Build and fight, resist and build, Mel. I do
That's
want
right.
to lift up. We've got a pretty attentive and a vigorous community here at Redneck Gone Green. I want to lift up Alex Marquez, who mentioned the phrase dual power. So I want to give you, there you go, cough, cough, dual power.
Yeah.
But way to go, Alex. Mel, for folks who may not be as familiar with dual power, we've been talking about it without naming it. So why don't you just, in a Gramscian terms, break it down without nubbing it down? What the heck is dual power, and why is Alex making that joke?
So the U.S. is a big country, right? It's got a continental scale. Washington, D.C. is 3,000 miles from where I sit in California. There are things about the federated system of government on which this country was founded. It was founded on a lot of bad things. Let's not do that. Let's not shy away from that. But one of the things that it can do is it does. I mean, until now, right? Trump's trying to break that down, but there are separations of powers between the federal government and states and municipalities, counties and cities. And actually county governments are very powerful in terms of like, being able to levy taxes, being able to like, construct systems of governance that can and one thing to watch very closely right now is how states and sanctuary cities are able to like make and enforce, right, rules that will go against Trump or can protect communities against what the federal government is trying to do. That's something that I'm keeping my eye on very closely, because that, like I said, like yeah, federal agents can come from 3,000 miles away, but if your community is organized, if if you have elected leaders, even when in your own little city, that can do something to make your local community's life better, that is an example of and then again, once if that movement grows and other people start thinking, hey, you know what, if we can do this in our one little place and they can do it in their little place, and hey, right, that might actually be something that could work. I mean, it worked in 1917. Think about Russia and how vastly geographically dispersed it was, and a lot of the most powerful Soviets came from cities, right? Of cities who banded together in the context of the collapse of their central government, also something to think about, right? As our federal government starts to kind of crack at the seams, it's what people do in their communities, honestly, that I think is more important than what goes on Capitol Hill. And
It does.
that's about building that dual power.
It is indeed, and so this has become a Gramsci show, right? But I gotta say, this world is dying. A new world is struggling to be born. Now is the time of monsters.
Right.
And we make a mistake if we think that Trump is the only monster. Like what we're seeing is the end and collapse of neoliberalism as a way to organize society. Make no mistake, Trump is a monster, but he, at the end of the day, wants the empire to exist in a way that allows him his grift. But the neoliberal Democrats want empire to continue in an orderly fashion so that the old empire will stay alive. At the end of the day, y'all, I am not fighting to save this dying system. I'm fighting to create a new one, or better still, to get back to the one that existed before the enclosure movement, before white supremacy was created, before literally before heteropatriarchy. Like, remember, our birthright, y'all, is supposed to be living in balance with Mother Earth and each other, in a reciprocal relationship and a joyful dance together. The thing is, the world that we're talking about getting back to, it's way better than the one that we're living in now. And so, to me, that's what I hold in my heart, because I know in my head, Mel, that it's possible to live like that because our ancestors did.
Oh yes. I'm trying to look up one of my favorite quotes from Buenaventura Durruti. I don't have the actual thing. If you want to keep going, I'm gonna take a look at it. But one thing I want to say though is, again, this is where ideologies are breaking down. Neoliberalism could not survive because of just the way capitalism works. You cannot expand forever. And kind of what we're seeing with Doge breaking down, the last remnants of sort of a state-led government programs that have been in place since World War II, is to expand private investment into those very places, right? Like healthcare, like all of the privatization. But that's not a sign of its strength. It's a sign of its weakness. And that's kind of what it's going. So if you want to comment on that while I look for this Durruti quote to close us out.
Yeah, you can close this out, but I'm gonna take this opportunity to ask you, Shane, like, how is this landing for you? Because a Mississippi redneck like you, I always like to make sure that I'm still communicating in a way that keeps you. So I'm really inviting you to say, how has this been landing for you, brother?
Well, I'm very grateful for the whole Gramsci breakdown of the concept of dual power. I think a lot of people really misunderstand that when it's spoken about. And looking at the comments here, you can see us, a couple of people have had said things like, I think, or was it both sides of the same is kind of loses people, where you have one government structure and you have one community structure. And that was something that I had struggled with myself until I realized that the goal is to ultimately replace what's there. And I think that's the key point, the key takeaway for me is to keep that in mind. And just the whole sense of like you, Mel, mentioned earlier, the thousands of organizations that are getting together and they're out in the streets on their own, not as one big conglomerate yet. I do worry about that sometimes, because here in New York City, like, there are protests every fucking day. Tuesdays at the out front of Fox News. Thursdays, they're in front of the New York Times, and on Saturdays they're at Tesla, or they're at the Tesla charging stations and the showrooms all across the city. And then randomly this past Saturday, we were at the Tesla thing, and another organization marched down from I think it was the AIDS Memorial, and joined up with everybody. Yeah. It was a very moving moment, and what I hope to see more of is that people more these groups of people joining together to form a
Mhm.
larger consensus of, hey, fuck you, this is our country, and we're going to do it our way. So that's where I'm sitting with.
Well, look, I mean, this is what Gramsci saw, what the potential he saw in a potential united front in these communities is that these new bonds, these things, are the breakdown of, what we all assume to be the categories of society are going to be played out through struggle. They're going to be played out through
Mhm.
struggle going together. Yeah, there's a ton of protests going on all the time, but guess what? People are going to these and they're meeting each other and they're becoming friends with
Mhm.
each other. And
Yeah.
maybe somebody who bought into some kind of Trump lie about, immigrants being the problem meets somebody at a protest, starts talking, and then realizes, hey, oh, that they're not my enemy, right? We actually want the same thing, right? One thing's that the thing that, and I absolutely believe that you cannot get through a time like this without faith. Okay, like I'm no atheist. I keep trying to be, but it doesn't work. But the faith that I have is that, look, what Trump and the fascists are trying to fight for can never be won because they're fighting for a fantasy. What the
Yeah.
neoliberal Democrats are trying to do is hold on to a status quo that is obviously not doesn't exist anymore, right? It is in crisis. So what they're trying to fight for is a fantasy too, but we fight for life. We who fight for, I mean, of course, there are dark people that are not fighting for life that we absolutely have to resist. And, and that's going to be part of the struggle. But those of us who get together in these communities to fight for life, that's reality. We will always win our war. They can never win their war. And that's what I take as an article of faith. And,
Well,
that
you look at it through history, and
absolutely.
every time it's always been good does triumph eventually.
The
That's right.
That's
arc
what
of the
we.
Well,
universe is
but it doesn't do
long.
it automatically, right? Like,
No,
as
it does not.
I said, I
It does
remember
not.
David sending you this thing with Lennon saying, "This shit doesn't do it by itself." You know? We have, but it's us putting our energy into the mix. It's ours putting our weight on the scale, right? That is, and playing it out through struggle. There's no guaranteed. There's no guaranteed, but nothing ever, but nothing's ever going to happen without struggle. And that's why, again, wherever, whatever, right now we're in a period of like, let's throw everything at it and see what sticks.
No, hey,
Let's just
again,
do it.
no, I tell people all the time, man, if you claim to be a Marxist or you claim to be a revolutionary and you're being dogmatic, you're
That's right.
doing it wrong. Like,
Yeah.
like principles, yes. Conviction, yes. But this is calling for experimentation. Mel, looky here.
And that's historical materialism, right? Like like I said, you can't do this without a political and moral compass that, and a lot of self reflection on clarity. But after you do that, you can't stay in your head. You got to go out and talk to people and engage.
So here we go, y'all. I want to say this has been a phenomenal conversation. We are at the end of the hour, Mel. So I have found this tracking the crisis so brilliant, and I'm so grateful for it. So you're my friend, so I'm going to ask you. I know I can't ask of you to come on live every week and do it, but hey, Mel Figueroa, what nickname did I give you when we were doing Movement School for Revolutionaries?
Mel, I have a slide for that, Figueroa.
So would it be possible? Would you give me and Shane like just a slide or something that we can use to take to our audience week after week? Because I think that what you're doing here is so valuable. Folks, if you're listening to me, go to democracycollaborative.org, go to Tracking the Crisis. If you're watching live on the YouTube or even the video of the YouTube, at this point, you'll see at the bottom third, that's how you subscribe to this. I think this tool is brilliant. It's something we desperately need. Mel, will you give us that, couple of 3-minute slide that we can start using every week?
Absolutely. I'll start working on it.
All
And
right.
and again, not only is it a Trump tracker, this is a movement tracker too. I think
Right.
you can't get a full grasp on what's going on unless you get both. So
Looky here, y'all. It's time, Shane, that we got to reel the line in, right? Like we are coming to the end of the program, but there's always more. And next week, I'm really excited to share that we're bringing one of my favorite musical artists and revolutionary singer-songwriters, Carsey Blanton, y'all, is going to join us here on Redneck Gone Green. And if you don't know Carsey Blanton yet, you're in for a real treat next week. Shane, I hope you feel better, brother. I know you.
Thank you, man.
Hang in there. We'll see you next week. Bye, y'all.
Okay, brother.